Yes.
Welcome to the Nordic Mythology Podcast. I'm Daniel Farron, of the company Horns of Odin, and I'm joined as always by Dr. Mathias Nordvig.
Hello, everybody. This time we are once again joined by Ed Gamester, who will be telling us about his new TV show, which is called Ragnarok, and is part of a series called Mythos, and it's of course about mythology, and this one will be about Norse mythology or Nordic mythology. So welcome to the show, Ed.
Thank you for having me back yet again. You know what they say, fourth time lucky. Right?
Is that what they say?
No one ever said that. You meant to cap out at 3 and then quit while you're ahead or behind, in my case.
No, you're ahead.
I'm an Ed, that's for sure.
You're ahead, Ed.
I've maxed out my comedy now.
Okay, bye.
Just to jump in, the show's not a TV show, is it? It's a live performance show.
What does that mean exactly? Does that not go on screens, or how does that?
I mean, I'm going to film it so you can watch it on a screen, but it's a piece of live theatre. That's kind of integral to the whole thing, because I have never seen anybody do live theatre this way before.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
Well, forgive my ignorance. I don't understand the technical details between live shows and TV and all that stuff. If I see it on a screen, it's something TV.
If it's here's a hint. Here's a hint. If it's on a TV, it's a TV show.
Yes, exactly.
If it's happening in real life, it's a live show.
I see.
Oh God, who's the expert now?
Obviously. Well, this is what I keep telling people. I do not understand technology in modern culture. I was trained in 800-year-old books written on leather that people would be eating and that kind of stuff. So that's my skill.
Nice.
I know, we found his weakness, the difference between a theatre show and TV. That's it. We've got him. I mean, I'm looking forward to whatever comes out of your mind. I mean, people who've listened to you now for 3 episodes will have a decent grasp of maybe how your brain works. So when you're let free to do your own show that you've written, put together, and pretty much just single-handedly created, I guess. I can't imagine how insane that might be.
Well, you know how people say they said it couldn't be done. Well, in this case, they just said it shouldn't be done, and I decided to do it anyway. And when they said that 2 months isn't really long enough to do this, I simply took so long to sign the paperwork that I now only have 4 weeks instead. So I've made it twice as difficult to do. But it's going to be done. At least I've invested all my life savings into renting a theatre for the day. So if it doesn't happen, well, it's a waste of money. And terrible embarrassment. But no, it's going to be great. It's going to be cool. People have. Yeah, if this is the 4th time I've been here, I guess that means people have listened to us talk about stuff for nigh on 5 hours, 4.5, 5 hours by this point. We did the whole of the Havamal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got through all of Havamal, and now you're on your own to talk about something else.
Well, to be fair, the talking about Havamal to an extent was part of the inspiration for the show, because actually discussing the poem and having Mathias read it out, and kind of like you're doing after the show, reading poetry and reading myths and actually doing them to an extent the way they were meant to be done. Obviously, I'm not doing anything in original languages or its original tempo or whatever, but actually telling a story, getting up on a stage and telling a mythological story or a classical story is part of the show. I wanted to try and bring that to life and do that in a contemporary way. So instead of just get up and tell poetry, I wanted to do it in a modern context with a retelling of a classical story, and then combine a collection of modern day things like theatre. Obviously, theatre hasn't been done before, but like modern theatre, and obviously, as you guys know, professional wrestling, which is something I've done for 20 years, but never in this context because. Yes, I figured that would be a good way to get the inherent violence across, but in a theatrical way.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing it.
Thank
Mathias, one thing I think just came to my mind is this: how would these stories have been performed originally? I guess they were meant to be at least some sort of performance, maybe not to the extent of professional wrestling, but I imagine it wasn't just somebody sat talking. There would be some theatrics, or at least kind of moving about.
I think it probably depends on the type of story and the setting, the conditions for relaying the information and all that stuff. But we could be very, very, very certain that we would have like a setting where there would be at least one performer, maybe more. When we look at the what's it called, the primary manuscript on Eddic poetry, the Codex Regius from 1270, there are little marginal notations that indicate when somebody is speaking in some of the poems, which suggests, of course, that there's at least a couple of performers involved, I think. And I mean, that's, you could also consider maybe moving around in a room or in an open space of some kind. Like, so now the hero rides to the forest, and then some guy goes with a pair of coconuts, of course. Click, 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 click.
That just reminds me of Monty Python.
Yeah, well, that's the general reference here. African swallows and all that stuff. And so it's like that would be part of the scenario for performance. Could we maybe consider a situation where like battles were fought and played out and all that stuff? Yeah, why not? Of course, you know, the Icelanders, they seem to have been a little thin-skinned when it comes to these kinds of things. There's one saga where this guy hits the other guy over the head with a spoon, and that turns into like a, you know, multi-generational family feud and all that stuff. And like, really, guys? Really? You couldn't have settled that right there on the boat instead of that bullshit?
I mean, depends how hard he hit him with the spoon.
Could have been how big the spoon was.
Yeah, they could have played that trick. Have you ever seen those videos on YouTube where you hold the spoon in your mouth and you bow your heads, and one of them is slapping the other one on the head with the spoon? But what the other one doesn't know is that as he dips his head down, he's just taking the spoon out and hitting him as hard as he can on top of the head. And it's like a little prank. So maybe it was that. Maybe he was just done dirty over a little spoon prank.
Okay, you know what? If somebody did that prank on me, it would be instant hands. Like, serious.
Generational warfare.
Generational warfare. That's, you know, a big wooden spoon over the top of the head.
No one needs that. Actually,
no, I'm just saying, like, so when the Icelanders were, but that, you know, prone to just trying to kill each other over minor things. Maybe we may discount the situation of like playing out, you know, battles and that kind of stuff, because if somebody you know did something wrong, then all of a sudden we have all these feuds. But maybe, you know, in other social settings where people weren't that you know
easily upset.
Well, that's the way to put it.
This is good to know. This is good to know, because the show I'm doing it's in the only theatre in London that was purpose built in the round. And what in the round means, for anyone who doesn't know, is that normally you have a stage and the audience is sort of in front of the stage. When a theatre is in the round, it means the stage is in the middle and the audience is all the way around it.
Okay.
Which changes the way that you do all kinds of theatre. It works really well for wrestling stuff because you can see the action from all kinds of angles. So we're used to performing in the round because of a wrestling ring. But what it means is you can incorporate the movement of the theater a little bit more because you're moving over to one side of the audience or another side, and you genuinely get closer and further away to people. You can kind of enter the stage from one of 4 different sides. Instead of just coming on left and right, you can come out right between people. From one corner, you can walk through the crowd to get to the stage, which adds like an intimacy to the theater, which I think will work really well for like the weaving of myths and bringing people into a different world. So knowing that perhaps, you know, there were elements of actually moving around incorporated in old theater is cool. And obviously the playing out of battle scenes is very exciting to me, because what my show is a combination of storytelling, which is telling a story to the audience, theater, which is telling a story on the stage to one another, the actors, and then the fighting element, because there are key battles throughout Norse mythology that I wanted to try and bring to life within the context of wrestling. So to know that there'd been battles and movements around the place traditionally is cool, because we can do a sort of a nod to that, but without doing it in a recreation battle way, you know, where people just kind of hold the shield and the spear and kind of poke at each other for just so long, because that seems to be how it was fought, with no consideration to whether or not anyone wants to watch that happen. The answer being no, nobody wants to watch that happen, never. So, but it happens. People do it, and people go and watch it, and then they leave and have a beer. I've probably just offended so many people.
Are you referring to Viking markets here?
No.
Let's gather 1,000 people from all over Europe in Viking outfits, and then have them stand around behind a shield and then poke at each other.
And they have to fall down when they get poked twice.
And everybody watching is like, it's really cold.
It gets so cold, right? It happens every year at Jorvik. Oh my god. Do you remember that time that me and Sean Parry accidentally broke in and led the funeral procession for Eric Bloodaxe? We got annoyed because they offered that they said that because we're celebrities, we could hold flaming torches in this procession. And then because we're kind of lazy and disorganized, they gave away all the flaming torches before we got there. So in protest, we just like marched in and joined the procession at the at the end. And we didn't know, because obviously we're not in the show, that halfway through the procession, it stops and splits in half and goes back around the other way. So suddenly, Sean and I, who just joined the back of this procession, were now leading the whole funeral procession of Jorvik. We're all the way around the outside until we met up with the lead actors at the front, who just sort of looked at us in panic. And then, unfortunately, the tippity-tappity battle happened, and we were spared our embarrassment by a lot of other people embarrassing themselves. Yeah. Well, just to clarify, there's a time and a place for the tippity-tappity battle. Obviously, if you're trying to recreate or show people how people would fight in the day, then absolutely, I'm super into it, and I'm very fascinated, and no doubt I would be on the losing end of anyone tippity-tapping me. But I do not find it entertaining to watch, so that's why we're not doing it.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I guess I get it. I just one little detail about this. There are place names in Scandinavia that have the compound "laker" in them, which means, well, the modern word, like for instance in Danish, is "leg," and so you can just hear how much we fucked up the language since back then, and that means play. And back then, that would refer to a lot of like different activities. You know, it could be play fighting, it could be rituals, it could be performance, and so on. So there's something that to this idea of like, you know, an open air scene, where people are standing around it.
How
I think
much
they also
was,
what?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was just gonna throw in there that they also seem to have used those sites for like goading two stallions against each other until they die of exhaustion. So that's also a thing. Yeah,
like Nordic cockfighting.
Nordic cockfighting with the stallions instead, I guess. So
sounds like a Wish version of the Colosseum.
I think so. Yeah, that's probably what it was.
What sort of role did ritual combat have? Because something that I find interesting as a wrestler, so someone who does what is considered to be fake fighting, the way I'm trying to bring it into my show is in a ritualistic context. So the original show I did was mainly just a fighting show. And the idea was that we would, for lack of a better word, dress up as gods. But the idea is we would adorn ourselves to represent a god. And then by going out and performing, we were essentially part of a ritual to invoke or at least to honor a deity. And then we just beat the shit out of some other deity. And, you know, that was a way of honoring them as war gods.
Please tell me that you have dressed up as Freyr with a giant phallus in that situation. Please tell me that you will use this particular situation right now as inspiration for future endeavors of that kind.
If there's any man for the job,
inspired you with my cockfighting references. You know what? No, that is exactly what I want to do. To try and bring gods and myths to life in ways that people haven't considered. So yeah, having Frey fighting with some enormous dong swinging around or using it as a cudgel, I think would be great.
Yeah,
definitely.
You can always, you know, to keep it more in check, you can always like tie it with a string to your neck so that it's not like, you know, all over the place all the time. And of course,
I think you're thinking of it being.
You must have a giant twirly mustache too, if we're going to go by the yes.
Well, I have a couple of excellent people who I put in the show to play as Frey.
Was there a certain process for picking who they were?
Yeah, you know how the they
feel like there's like an interview story here somewhere.
Well, you know how Skadi chooses her husband by looking at all the gods' feet and everything else is covered up. Well, the audition process for Frey was much the same, except it wasn't the feet.
Just a hole in a curtain.
Yeah. And if you can fit through the hole, that is not you. Well, no, in this particular show, basically, I'm too poor to employ very many people. So my show is quite limited. And what that has meant is I've sort of like combined gods together and kind of changed some stuff. So in the show, we have Freya, but she's kind of a combination of Frey and Freya. So she has some of both their characteristics. She has the boar and the ship and the magical sword. And her brother is instead Balder because he's like a golden god and she's a golden god. Rather than having Frey and Freya at the same time, I just didn't have enough people to do everything. But also I wanted to just mix it up, keep it simple. Instead of having dozens of gods and characters, just keep it, like condense the myths to a handful of different gods so that people can keep track of who's going on and doing what, rather than having just tons of giants and gods and all descending and no one really knowing what's going on.
I think that's probably a really good idea because you get, especially if you got people there who aren't deep into this world, it can get a little bit confusing. I know when I first kind of started reading these sagas, it was because you get people with similar names as well, like Freya, like they're very similar. So if you don't know, you can all really easily get confused. So keeping it nice and simple is not a bad thing.
Well, put it this way. I have a pretty decent filter for this, which is that if I'm confused, or rather the other way around, if I understand what's going on, then I'm pretty sure everyone else does because I am an idiot. And so it's kind of the whole thing has been sense checked. You know, if Ed gets it, then we're okay.
No, I cannot wait to see this show.
It'll be interesting, and to an extent, I hope it ruffles some feathers. I mean, obviously, I hope it ruffles some feathers. I'm basically a professional feather ruffler. But I've done a whole bunch of stuff like portrayal of the gods and my portrayal of the stories and even my portrayal of the monsters, which I hope will annoy some people who have a very fixed view of how it needs to be. So one of my favorite aspects of the show, for example, is the children of Loki. Instead of being actual monsters, like a snake that envelops the world, and a wolf that is somehow so big that it can be chained up, but also literally eat the entire earth with its mouth. I've made them people because they're Loki's children. And the idea is that the reason they are portrayed as monsters is because the gods and the people in control of history and the story hate them and want to demonize them and don't want to talk about a berserker as being an actual man who beat the crap out of them. No, he was a wolf the size of a castle. And, you know, Hela, she was this foul, half-dead creature that we just banished because she was already as much dead as she was alive, is actually just like a perfectly normal person who just happens to fall on the wrong side of history. So I wanted to try and portray that, in part because I think that's an interesting way of looking at two rival clans and the creation of historical stories. Also because I didn't have a giant wolf or a serpent in my show. So I had to I didn't want to dress a dude up as a wolf because I'm not making the Lion King here, man.
You should have left it at point one. I think the first point was excellent, and you didn't have to pull back the curtain with point two.
Of course I did, because otherwise people would be like, "What? It sounds artistic." No, it's just me being like, "Oh God."
Sounds like he knows what he's doing.
No.
Okay, so just one question from somebody who is foreign to the English language. What is the actual physical action that goes with feather ruffling? What happens?
I mean,
is it like, or
I'm gonna take a guess here at being like, if you go up to an animal and you kind of like screw up its hair, like a cat. I mean, that's a better example than a feathers. But if you go to a cat and you like fuck up its hair, and then the cat's like, "Oh god damn, I spent all day on this," and then they have to. That's how I imagine it being. Like, it's kind of getting up in people's shit and being like, "Bah," and they get irritated.
So I could see a situation where, you know, if you try to do that to, let's go back to, somebody mentioned cocks earlier. If you try to do that to an actual rooster, pretty sure it'll fuck you up, right?
Oh, exactly, big time, big time.
But that's
like
those
spores are going right in your face.
That's the expression, though. Ruffling feathers, you're upsetting somebody, so they're gonna
mess you up.
Ah, yes, of course, that makes sense then. Okay,
well, they're gonna try and mess you up.
Yeah. Okay.
So therefore, Ed is going to probably upset some people with his.
Of course.
Portrayal.
I'm planning on getting some chickens, so it's also nice to know what to do and not to do with them.
don't ruffle the feathers,
and don't kick them. Otherwise, you know, all the people of Foul Reach will just come charging at you and hack you up. If you've ever played Skyrim, it's just.
I have not, but now I might have to try, because you walk into their village and you like kick a chicken and then they come kill you.
Oh,
they do. It's a problem. It's a meme as well, I believe. I only know 3 memes. That's one of them.
All right. So you've touched on the premise a little bit with what you were saying about Lokis Children. And we spoke about it before the show quite a bit. And I think it's a really cool idea that you've kind of stepped away from the whole monster type idea of what Ragnarok is. You know, you've got a few monsters thrown in there, and you've brought it back very much to humans and humanity, which, by the sounds of it, could be for financial reasons. But I thought it was a really interesting take on this story. So I'm going to go with that one, that it was a very clever insight by you.
I mean, to do myself justice, I came up with the idea before it occurred to me that the alternative would be somehow creating a vast wolf. I much preferred the idea of it being people, because drawing on our theme of the podcast is that what I enjoy most about the Norse mythology is the interactions of the people. I'm interested in the cosmological element. I like ice giants, and I like, you know, fire giants riding over the Bifrost to burn the world. And I like Ymir and the whole world being made out of him, and, you know, giant cows and everything else. But what I find interesting about the creation and destruction of the Nordic universe is the human interactions. And what I find interesting about Ragnarok is the fact that the gods, I mean, they bring it on themselves, and I suppose in part because it's foretold and fated, so there's nothing you can do about it. But they also don't really try very hard to avoid it, which I have always really enjoyed. It's very much puts me in the mind of knowing your destiny and just doing it, like not trying to spend your life running away from what you know is foretold or what your destiny is, and just getting on with it. And riding out to fight the giants and the children of Loki, knowing that you cannot win, that it's foretold that you're not, but instead of just scurrying off, still riding out and still having those battles and those fights is, for me, probably the most motivating thing I took from the Nordic mythology, which is not to be afraid of anything, even if you know your demise is imminent, to ride out and face it like a freaking badass, because everyone dies. This is what has basically been the foundation of my whole life, and the foundation of a lot of the guild as well. I'd be lying if I said I didn't just steal a lot of it from the Norse. And so what I'm getting at here is this: the key story behind my show isn't about flaming giants burning the world and massive monsters rising up from the deep. It's about the fact that the gods created the world and then sort of systematically watched or let it fall to pieces because of their own relationships with one another. Like, they invite Loki in despite knowing he's a trickster god, and then continually are annoyed with him for being a trickster god. But they also know he's going to be their demise, but they don't get rid of him. They keep him there, and they know that they're going to chain him up and he's going to break free, but they can chain him up anyway. Like the interactions between Odin and Loki, and someone who brings somebody into their tribe knowing that this is going to be a troublemaker, not just getting a bad feeling in his waters, but knowing that it's written. There's a freaking poem, there's a seeress that says this guy isn't just going to be your death and the death of your children and everyone else. He's going to cause the death of the whole world. But Odin still brings him into the family and gives him a chance, knowing that he will forego that chance. But equally, Loki himself, I'm sure this is something everyone who reads the mythology gets at, is Loki, he's a bit of a dick, obviously, but a lot of the time he is treated pretty badly by the other gods. And you can almost, and what I'm trying to do in my show is almost see it from his point of view. And like, would you not want to screw these guys over by the end of it? By the time you're chained to a rock with a snake spitting in your face, by that point, have you maybe not had enough? You've built the walls of Asgard, albeit by trickery, but you got it done. You've given the gods all the weapons that set them apart from the mortals, again, albeit because you had to do it because you shaved off Thor's wife's hair, but nevertheless, come back with a whole bunch of amazing weapons. You've kind of consistently showed up for the gods and given them the things that set them apart from mortals. And yet, when the shit hits the fan, who's the guy that gets kicked out and chained under the world and left to rot under there? Yeah, I mean, he kills Balder, which is a dick move, to be fair. But by that point, like, what have the gods done? They've thrown one of his sons into the sea. They've chained one of them up underground forever and banished his daughter to the underworld. So, I mean, killing Balder seems like, well, that's one of three. Like, what are the other two revenges? So I think there's a lot of ways.
Let's just be fair here. I mean, they are in a situation where they're all standing around just throwing weapons at Balder.
Yeah, that's a good point. They are kind of just throwing everything, including the kitchen sink at him.
Yeah,
exactly. Exactly. Well, I mean, that myth specifically. So everything in my show, I've tried to draw on mythology and give a nod to it, and never take the piss. Just change little details here and there to tell a different version. And obviously the death of Balder has to feature, because without that there is no Ragnarok. But I've tried to do that differently as well. I didn't just want it to be like, oh, Balder's invincible, let's chuck stuff at him, and then the blind guy chucks mistletoe. I mean, I don't want to give too much away, so if anyone is planning to come to my show and doesn't want to know little spoilers, stop listening. But what happens in my version of the show is that Balder is invincible because every living thing has said, we won't harm you. But after the gods like chain up and throw away Loki's kids one by one, and they send Hel to the underworld. Now, in my show, they kill Hel. That's how she gets the underworld. There's banish her. Boom, they kill her dead. So when Loki
makes
comes
a lot
in,
more sense, actually. You know?
well, I always sort of seen it as that, as like a metaphor. You know, they chuck this one kid in the sea and so on. I always saw it as
Well, I
sort of a
mean,
metaphor.
honestly, the myth about that happening is also very much Snorri trying to make Odin look like God, All Father. It's like now All Father took the primordial snake and chucked it into the deep sea, and it's like that sounds awfully familiar from the Bible, my friend. So yeah, that's
well, this is cool. And what I don't know, I'm talking about my show a lot, but I guess that's why I'm here. What I try and do in the show is at the beginning of the show, you have Odin. And Odin sets out to make his clan the best. And then the Vanir turn up and he has to fucking deal with the Vanir. And when they collaborate, then they have to deal with the giants. By the time they've defeated the giants and the Vanir and the primordial forces, they have decided that they are gods. They're not. They're just dudes, but they've got a bunch of magical weapons. Baldur's become invincible. They've defeated the giants. They've decided they're gods. So just like you said, by the time that the kids turn up, all of a sudden, they feel like they can judge those kids because they are now gods. And these kids of Loki are not worthy to be part of the gods. Like, what have they done? Whatever. So they're people. So they get banished the same way, and Hela gets killed. And so when Loki turns up in the flighting of Loki, that kind of myth, where he rocks up and he starts just ripping on each of the gods, and then eventually Balder or Thor will be like, look, I'm going to beat you up. I'm going to use Balder. He's invincible. And Loki's like, cool. Well, I get a partner too. Guess who he brings to be his partner? So it's his daughter. Now, there's one fucking person that can kill Balder because Balder is invincible to living things, but he's not invincible to dead things. And so the very same person he killed earlier for not being worthy will now come back. And now we have a fight. Now we have an invincible god who can only be killed by who can not be killed by living things, having to fight for his life against someone who's dead because he had her killed. That, to me, is the human story of Ragnarok.
I like it. I like this reinterpretation.
I say the human story, and there's literally a zombie in that scene. But the point being, it's a story of retribution, and it's a story of almost karmic revelations of creating, having to live in the bed that you made, which is what Ragnarok is. It's the gods messing with people and messing with each other until it's all just combined into one shit heap and there's no way out. But because they're the gods, they don't run. They're like, oh, we fucked up. Let's do this. And then we have the biggest fucking wrestling match of all time.
There we go. That's what we're all there to see.
Of course.
But I mean, Matthias, I know Ed's kind of putting together this story, but if you Ragnarok is naturally filled with monsters and myth and mythical things happening. But if you stripped it all back to its core, could it be just a story of humanity that's been pumped up over generations and generations and generations and added to and changed, and the people have been lifted to godlike standard? Maybe the death of Balder was the clash of two clans, and what the favorite son was killed, and that's what triggered off this whole cycle of destruction between two families, I guess, that maybe to them felt like the end of the world. Because again, obviously we're talking about people who don't, they know areas outside of Scandinavia, I guess, exist, but very much their localized area is their whole world.
Yeah, so so there's a couple of things to consider. First of all, stories about the end of the world are ancient and present in pretty much any mythology on the planet. People have always had a concept of like, oh, the world's going to end. And sometimes those ideas are formed in actual experiences of natural disasters, or wars and those kinds of things. So it's very likely that part of the stories of Ragnarok has something to do with real life experiences at one point. The thing about it is, of course, that it's entirely impossible to pinpoint it to a location or to a group of people. I mean, there are crackpots out there that would say that the Icea were originally a tribe from somewhere from Asia. One of those crackpots that's not a Sturluson himself. And then we have later people riffing off of that. And Atlanteans and ethereal space humans from the North Pole, but that's more of a Nazi thing. You guys didn't know that was like,
it rings a bell.
Heinrich Himmler was on that one. Yeah. So
Meth is a wonderful.
And meth. Yeah. So there's definitely some aspect of some social, I would call it, social reality behind it. In the story about how the meat of poetry is created, right? It begins right after the Icea and Vania have had their first war of the world. Is that's in the time from creation till destruction. The cultural invention of war is the meeting between the Icea and the Vania. And what do? They settle a truce, and then they all come together to spit in a giant tub, which is, totally meaningful. If you're, doing primitive fermenting, primitive fermenting processes include or can include using spittle and chewed plant material. So that's really interesting, because what does that mean? It means that we have the first war of the world. These two clans, they clash, and what do? They then sit down and invent alcohol, and from that comes poetry as well, right? So cultural things and inspirational things and so on get drawn together. And so what about Ragnarok? Well, that's where two clans again clash, and the whole thing falls apart. Jötnar and Icea, or the gods with the Vania included, right? They clash and have to settle some kind of imbalance that has been created over time in the cosmos. That's at least how we can read it from the source material. Whether people actually believed this back in like 900 and something, we don't really know. But that's how it's been recorded in the material, that there design flaws, right?
It seems as though it's pitched as almost a good versus evil kind of story, but part of it is, or I've always seen it, it's like the Jotnar and the kind of like the dead, they seem to be almost put down. You always like the giants always seem to be getting smashed by Thor. I don't think they ever really do much wrong, I guess. But it seems to, maybe it's like if it's not actual giants,
dicks, man, they're total dicks.
So
one of the main
I feel like the gods are dicks too.
So one of the main codes of code of moral codes of presumably pre-Christian religion, right, is that if a stranger comes to your door, and we have been through this already, right, because we had drunken Odins show up, right? What do you do with that stranger? You make sure that he gets like a place by the fire, a nice little towel, and something to eat and so on. Especially if he's drunk, you want to calm him down a little bit.
Keep him away from your wife.
Exactly. So what happens when Thor goes to Geirröður, for instance? The first thing that happens is that one of his daughters tries to drown him in her piss or menstrual blood.
Yes, but don't forget,
the other one tries to smash him against the roof, and then Geirröður shows up and throws a molten rock in his face. That's not particularly hospitable, right?
No, but don't forget
to regulate that situation.
Don't forget that this guy is known as the Giant Slayer. His job, pretty much his job and sole purpose is to kill giants. So no wonder they're a little bit like, dude, fuck off. We're not having you in our house.
Aren't you the guy from the Red Wedding?
Yeah.
Right.
It feels like, but to put it into like a human context, I guess it feels almost like the giants maybe are a race or a group of people who were kind of pushed down for some reason. Maybe they were different. And
if we look at the meanings of the names that these giants typically have, they are generally associated with natural features or processes in the natural landscape around you. Geirröður, for instance, means clearing of woods or something like that.
Okay.
Hrungnir means brawler or psychopath or something like that. Yes, it has Hrungnir means somebody like there's a few people in historically in the Icelandic literature that have had the name Hrungnir, like Thorstein Hrungnir, and it's like that signals that's the guy you don't want to mess with at the bar.
Is that the way around? Does the name mean like psychopath, or is it like one of those situations where, you know, someone is called Dick, and then he turns out he's not a great guy, and then everyone starts calling each other dicks, and then all of a sudden his name means Dick, and you're like, oh, is that like maybe Hrungnir is just a name, and then he was a bit of Dick, and then everyone was like, well, you're a bit of a Hrungnir.
Like
was that the way around, or did it mean did it mean psychopath before?
So I mean, it means brawler, right? Somebody who starts fights, right?
Okay. Right. So it literally means,
yeah,
my name is Fighter.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you would, I guess you would assume, okay, so if this guy's called Brawler, he's probably a psycho, right? We know that guy, right? We know that guy at the pub, right?
Yeah.
That's just the guy you avoid unless you want to fight, right?
It's Dan. It's Dan for Rand.
Don't bring me into this.
So and what is the story all about? Well, you know, there's a bunch of stone and rock and all those kinds of things involved in the entire story about Hrungnir. Like his head explodes in rocks and shit, and his heart is made of rocks, and his weapon is a stone, and his shield is made of stone, and stone, right? So natural phenomena. The place where they fight is called Grjótunagarður, right? So the
easy for you to say.
Yes, I guess so. Which is like it means like the rubble farm, or the farm full of stones. So that has everything to do with stones too, and that's what we see with most of these giants. Their names have something to do with natural features, right? So if we look at what are the gods doing when they're messing around with these giants, well, they're regulating natural features of
they're landscaping.
They're totally landscaping, right? They terraforming.
So do you think
I like landscaping better. They're walking around with those leaf blowers.
Do you think maybe then the deaths at the hand of the giants, or the attacks, are maybe people getting into trouble in natural areas? I guess maybe, like you said, with Thor almost being drowned, maybe not in piss, but in a lake or something along those lines.
Yeah, there's a couple of elements to it. Like, one element is definitely the very Christianized part of the story that has to do with, like, the gods need to be killed off because Christ has to happen. That's the context in which this story exists today, thanks to those medieval writers. But aside from that, looking beyond that into a possible pre-Christian situation. Oh wow! I have like a scene from what's that movie called, The Birds or something like that? 50s horror movie, 60s horror movie.
The Crow.
Yeah, I know it.
It's
called The Birds.
Yeah. Got a
birds.
Huge bunch of crows and ravens up there, and even a couple of magpies fighting with things. Yes, yes, nature is wonderful. Going back to the
It's
topic at hand.
COVID-19.
COVID-19, yes.
I think something's probably dead out in your backyard.
I have plenty of dead things in the backyard.
Oh, there you go then.
Yes, I have most of a skeleton from an elk lying around. Going back to the subject at hand, though.
I feel like that's such an awkward way to go back.
So the situation is, it could also be that the story is expressing maybe some fears about, say, in the natural world, overtaking, right, in different ways. The idea that this. So there's something going on in the. Might have to break some hearts here, but it's possible.
You ruffle them feathers.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm not fucking with with those roosters.
Ain't fucking with no cocks.
I ain't fucking with them. No, so one of the things that we have to take into consideration is that it's quite possible that fucking world serpent never existed. Mm-hmm. Because the references to it in that situation where Thor is fighting it in the original poem could be the wolf. It's very ambiguous.
Were they just auditioning for the person to play Frey, and that's how you got the world serpent?
Is that another dick joke?
That is a dick. I haven't had a dick joke for a few episodes.
That is true. We needed.
Is that true with oh god, now let's stretch the old knowledge here. There are a few other wolves. There's like Freki and Gary and so on and so forth. There's a lot of wolves, right? There's just a lot of wolf stuff going on in Ragnarok. Is it possible that some of the other wolves, for example, the wolf that kills what I'm getting at here is it possible that Fenrir, the massive wolf, is also these other wolves, not necessarily the ones chasing the planets, but also, like you said, Jormungandr and the World Serpent, they're all pretty much just the same astrological, crazy, massive wolf via different.
So going back to dick jokes, Jormungandr means the giant staff.
Oh,
FYI. so
interesting.
Yes. So and that seems to be a quite old concept. And it could be a reference to it could also mean something like the giant spirit, the spirit of the world, or maybe the world tree or the central pillar or something like that, if we go by those interpretations that suggest that there's that focal point of some kind of
language is amazing, right? It's either the world tree or a massive cock or a snake or someone with the staff. It's something like that, but either way, it's going to rise up and eat us all.
Exactly.
Oh,
so the thing is that there's something happening in the transmission from whatever mythology these people believed in before they converted to Christianity, then some Christian synthesizing and remixing and so on, and then Snorri Sturluson like fully DJing on that beat, right? That's the way to put it.
Nice. I like that. That's a great analogy.
Right, yeah. So Snorri's idea that Hel is like the daughter of Loki and all that, that's stuff that he comes up with. That's not original. Hel is like an ancient goddess that has always been around.
Mm-hmm.
Jormungandr as that giant staff or spirit of the world is its own thing, right? There are some kennings in skaldic poetry that actually seem to suggest that it's like the spirit of the water as well, or something like that. Or
Loki really. I mean, it's pretty far-fetched that Loki gave birth to a world-circling snake, but Loki giving birth to the spirit of water itself? Or is that just the idea? Like, the whole idea of these things being children of Loki, like if Loki is representative of chaotic forces, in general, then it would make sense that like the kin of Loki would be tsunami and wildfire and other cataclysmic events that Ed can't afford to put in his show. Yeah, because I like that. I like that idea.
And the image of the wolf that comes and destroys things, right? That's a symbol of chaos. The wolf is chaos in and of itself. So those two wolves that are chasing around the celestial bodies, they're the chaotic dark forces that have to be there to complement the life-giving sun, that kind of stuff. Gary and Freki, again, that's Snorri Sturluson inventing shit.
Nice.
Like it's pretty straightforward in the poem Grimnismal, where we get that's the original source to both Hugin and Munin and Geri and Freki, right? And it's not ravens, and it's not wolves in the poem. It's references to Odin getting drunk, and drunk on war, and feeding the war beasts. That's what it's all about.
Right.
Fjolvitni is a reference in that poem too. Fjolvitni means literally the destroyer of people, right? And that's what's going on in the poem. And then you have Snorri, who's like, no, we need a cartoon-like king who sits on a throne with two ravens on his shoulders and two wolves next to him. And that has been appealing to the Alsa bros ever since. So there you go.
Nice. Interesting.
It looks cool.
I'm gonna have to really cancel the ravens for the show.
No. Keep the ravens. There are plenty of other legitimate
Matthias,
in there.
I can't afford any ravens.
They're just pigeons painted black.
Oh shit.
They're not even pigeons, they're cats.
With wings.
Yeah, I just stuck some wings on them.
Cardboard wings on them.
Go out. Do it.
Oh, dear.
But no, so
that's really
you know, I think it's a great rethinking that you're doing here, because we need to rethink the mythological material and come up with better ways to work with it in general. Snorri Sturluson did that back in 1200 and something, and then people have been like, "Oh, that's got to be the real deal."
That's the one. Well, that's kind of a large part what I want. I'm trying to do a lot. Let's be honest. I'm trying to do too much with this show in too short a period of time. But one of the things I wanted to do was explore the idea of retelling and recreating the myths in a way that makes sense in a modern context, like a human context. But also because people have become so freaking obsessed with the exact details of like which of Odin's eyes this and which flipping raven that and which wolf this, that they've almost lost the entire point of these stories. And they've certainly lost the point of the stories that got me into them when I was a kid. And I'm sure you guys are the same, and many people listening to this podcast would have come to this young and been inspired by these things whilst young, and have watched as the world has suddenly caught up to them and has now taken over them. And all of a sudden they're in Marvel movies and they're on Facebook groups and everyone is arguing about nonsense to do with them. And I would really much rather be part of a group of people that are just taking the heart of it and trying to move it forward, to be like, okay, let's leave the Asa Bros behind and let's leave all of this like infighting and nonsense and actually look at what is inspiring about these stories and try to retell it in a whole different way. And if that ruffles a bunch of feathers because people are like, Baldur wasn't a son of this, he was a son of that, and Freya wasn't this, then who cares? Like, good, stay behind, stay over there, stay pretending that Snorri is like the original Viking myth, because anyone who ever read it from the beginning knows that's bullshit anyway. So we're going to carry on retelling them and carry on like doing our own versions. And if that winds people up, then great, because like that's how I came to it in the first place. I like getting wound up about things. It's how art gets created. And so if I can wind other people up, then cool. Maybe they'll create some art to like slap me back where I belong and so on and so forth. So man, it's really cool to hear how ambiguous all of this is. in the first place, and to hear how many different variations there can be of things that people already assume is you take for granted. There's a world serpent and there's a Fenris wolf, and if you can say, well, maybe there's actually not even those things, then why are we arguing about any of it? Let's just tell cool stories, and most importantly of all, let's watch some professional wrestling done in a theatrical context. Obviously, that's
we'll put a link in for the tickets.
You better move quick. They're selling like hotcakes.
Good.
No,
I
fully support that. I fully support that. The very eloquent rant right there. I feel like you did it even better than I could.
I'm printing some posters tomorrow, and it's going to say "Approved by Dr. Mathias Nordvik." On the very top, academic. I'm going to list all your qualifications.
Can you put a picture with me in there with thumbs up?
Of course, send me one.
But keep that background.
Send me a picture, and I will 100% put that on a poster because that would be amazing. Approved, academically certified.
Yes, with this like a little like sun behind me, sort of like, the shining. And
I get it.
Yeah,
I can work Photoshop. That's a lie. I can't. I actually own a different piece of software called GIMP.
Oh, I've heard of that. It's the
shit.
It's the free answer to Photoshop, and I don't know why the fuck they called it GIMP. Why?
I mean, everything in my life is the free answer to everything. So that's why Fenris isn't a giant wolf, but is instead the largest man I know wearing a rug. I even bought the rug yesterday at Dunelm. This is a true story. I took it out of one bag that said it was £65 and put it into another bag that said it was £40. So Dunelm, if you're listening, get better bags, yo. Because people are on it. Especially me.
I mean, we do not condone that behavior.
That's brilliant. You have to catch me first. Unfortunately, I advertise where I'm going to be at all times for marketing purposes, so it's pretty easy to catch me. Just don't catch me before December because I have a very important show to do. You may have heard of it.
So, yeah. No, I think that's a wonderful look on things and a way to think about things, because the people arguing are never those who know the most. You never see
or anything
the professors or doctors. I mean, you find me there, so that shows the level of intellect that these people have. But you never find Mathias in there, or pretty much any of the intellectual guests we have on this podcast. They're never in these Facebook groups arguing with people, because they know themselves that pretty much nothing is certain. That you have to take a lot of guesses and maybe read between the lines and figure stuff out and try and do your best guess at what was meant by these things. There's no absolutes. That's one thing I've learned over the last 80 plus episodes, is that there's very much we can say this is how it was or what they thought. If anything, it's a struggle.
It's true. It's complicated too, right? Because it is so easy, and we know this, today, like gossip or somebody misrepresenting what really went down in some situation. It's a pretty standard thing that humans, apply their own perspective onto something, and then something gets turned into an event that was never meant to be in the first place.
But that's what humans do, right? That's the thing we're best at of all things, is putting our own perspective on stuff and then retelling it. That's why we have stories and why we have myths and why we have religions and pretty much everything else, is that what we're best at is contextualizing our experiences through our own perceptions and then communicating that. That's pretty much the only thing we do particularly well. I mean,
and this is why, that is exactly why we need to be so fucking careful talking about the truth, the fucking truth, as if it were some kind of monumental thing out there. No, when it comes to human interactions and culture and all that stuff, there's a billion different ways and variations and diversions and weird one way, and now I'm just babbling, but you know what I'm getting at, right? There's a lot of fucking ways in which humans can think about the world, and it's it's ridiculous, this idea that there should be one version of Odin and the mid-god serpent and all of that stuff, right?
This is it sort of ties into what you were saying before we went live, or whatever we do here. I'm not very good at podcast things. You were saying about how you got two large pieces of wood, and you were to carve them into carvings of the gods. And I asked you whether you were going to do one god on each piece, or whether each piece was going to represent lots of gods. And you said, well, I mean, why should I say what? If you tell people what you said, because I thought it was interesting about how you weren't just going to carve Odin as being some old dude with a beard and one eye, which has been done a lot of times and ripped off a lot of times and put onto clothing a lot of times, you know.
Yes.
And so on. What did you say? What did you say when I asked you about it?
My creative idea with those god poles is that I'll combine concepts and ideas that can be visualized in different ways into sort of like a totem pole kind of looking thing, because that's what the so-called Undvegisölur, as they were called in the old days, which actually means spirit way pillars. So that's pretty fucking cool.
That's very cool.
Yeah,
that sounds like Jormungandr in a nutshell.
Exactly.
It's a spirit and a pillar.
Yes, and exactly.
Way.
In a way. No, and this always gets me when when I read sagas translated into English, and it's like, oh, then he took his high seat pillars and cast them overboard, and it's like, no, it's the spirit way pillars, people. It's not a high seat pillar. It's just unfortunate.
Anyway, mad.
Doesn't it just?
Anyway, my idea is to basically try to, and there will of course be a raven in there at some point. Visualize different aspects of deities.
We've talked about this on a previous episode about how everyone imagines Odin with one eye. But obviously, at some point, Odin had two eyes. That's how he became a one-eyed god, because he had two in the first place. So you don't have to represent Odin as being one-eyed or anything else. So just the idea that you can even, for example, in my show, like I have to represent gods in the ways that the characters and the people I have and have cast like I don't have a Titanic giant, I don't have a one-eyed man, and I don't have like a super burly red-bearded dude. But those characteristics, those physical characteristics, seem almost irrelevant. Hell, the genders of a lot of the characters seem irrelevant. At one point, Odin was a woman in my show because I had a fucking awesome female wrestler actor, and I thought she would make a badass Odin, so I didn't even cross my mind that it would be weird to cast Odin as a woman. Granted, there's a lot of like male stuff in the myths, but for my retelling, didn't frickin' matter. Things have changed. She was already booked, damn her. And so now Odin is a man again, but for a while he wasn't, and Frey in this is a woman who I've just amalgamated with Freya to be one character. I guess what I'm getting at is I'm super into the idea of running with different interpretations of the gods or the traditional characters, making monsters into humans, making well, you get what I'm saying. You get what I'm saying. I dig it.
Definitely.
I'm into it.
It feels like people have lost the willingness to allow their own interpretations of things. They say you get so many people arguing over the little ins and outs and the nuances and the exacts, and they just forget to read the stories. I imagine most of them probably haven't even read the stories. They're just regurgitating the little bits that they've read here and there, or the things that they've learned from reading websites in shorthand of what Odin did or what Odin had. So they don't interpret the actual stories in a way that they enjoy and what they mean to them. It's just a case of they read a website that in shorthand listed that Odin had a spear, he had 2 wolves, he had 2 ravens, and then from there on, or maybe they watched a popular person's YouTube channel and regurgitated it as fact when not everything is always fact.
It's because people are terrified of being wrong for some reason now.
Well, no, it's also because the idea that if I can like regurgitate something that was said by an authority, then by then I will gain some kind of authority by association.
Yeah, that's true.
And
that's why I come on this podcast, because I just listen to what you say and then I go out into the world and I'm like, blah, I've got Dr. Matthias Nordvig with 2 thumbs up.
I need to get some stickers with my face.
We need them for the podcast.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, we do.
I'm very into this.
New marketing idea right there.
Well, send me a picture this evening because I'm doing the printing of my posters and stuff to tomorrow morning. So I need the double fingered and I'll try and get some.
You need the double what?
Hey, I've been looking at George Michael all evening, huh? Give me a break. I'm only human.
George Michael and tidy whities.
The only way I've ever imagined him.
For anybody who's only listening to this, Mathias' background this evening is George Michael in tighty whities.
Thank you for saving me there, Dan.
Just to try and clear that up for a second. Okay, my last question, Mathias, before we wrap this up, is completely forgotten what it was. Okay, no, it's come back to me. So if say for 1,000 years now, people have thought that Odin has 2 ravens and has 2 wolves because of Snorri, at what point does that then become the truth? Even though I guess like in the original context of what Snorri was telling, he didn't have these wolves, or maybe like pre-Christian people, he didn't have the wolves and ravens. But now, in this existence of the past 1,000 years he has had, at what point does it then become kind of, he had 2 ravens and 2 wolves, I guess?
Okay.
Or do you kind of just have to maybe try and separate the 2 words? That
you have to ask yourself, in what kind of literature does a character always wear the same outfit and carry the same items and do the same things? Marvel, exactly. Cartoons, comics, right? Batman, of course, like he's like changed over time, but he looks the freaking same. He represents a bat, right? And back in the day, it was more fashionable to have him in some kind of like awkwardly tight bodysuit with codpiece. And then later on, we have the Christian Bale style Batman and all that stuff with sort of more like cool body armor and I'm gonna kick your ass.
Yeah, he used to have the yellow tight whities, the tight yellows over his batsuit.
Yeah, so that's the codpiece I was referring to. So the problem there when it comes to mythology is that if we turn mythology into cartoons, and that is something that Snorri Sturluson was doing, and that is something that posterity has been doing, because posterity, the people who came after Snorri Sturluson, of course, didn't believe in these gods as gods. They didn't believe in them as in representing anything else than humans. Right, that's how Snorri Sturluson represented them. He said, "Oh, these were really, they weren't gods; they were just humans," because he was Christian. And the people who came after, the scholars, intellectuals in the 1600s and so on, usually also treated them the same way. And then in the 19th century and so on, they've been treated mostly as like a curiosity of the past. And then sometime in the 19th century, there's enough public interest in this stuff that we see general like companies and such using them as brands, right? And that's how we now in in Denmark, for instance, we have a certain type of yogurt that we can only refer to as Emir, because it was branded as the primordial giant back in the day, right?
Wow.
Wow. And that's the same thing. Most beer in Scandinavia is like Thor or some Viking or something else, right? And that's because popular culture latched onto it. And then you get the production of popular stories that are drawn, right? And that's how we get comic books and cartoons. And that's how Marvel also comes into existence in what, 66, I think it is, somewhere around that time. So these figures of human imagination and creativity, they've now been like locked in probably the most boring version of human creativity, which is just like capitalistic reproduction of crap. In, you know, multiple Marvel series. And if we ever get into somebody from Marvel on the podcast, I definitely didn't say that. But
I didn't hear it.
The point is, that's not necessarily how it worked back in the day, right? You know, the idea of a god that has birds, right? That has been a very important, significant context for somebody's whole worldview and existence, right? What the birds represent. We don't know what they represented to these people, but maybe they represented something like soul carriers, or you know, your ability to travel to other worlds, and hence also your ability to think outside of that fucking box.
But isn't that where it has all kind of gone wrong, though?
Yes.
That, like you said, back in the day, mythology was alive and it represented something that was actually happening as something you engaged with. Whereas now we're filled with people who are convinced that the mythology is important to them as a dead husk of story that they will regurgitate, instead of actually engaging with it as a living, breathing representation of humanity. And so to answer, like, as an addition to what you just said, and to answer Dan's question of at what point does it become true that Odin has frickin' 2 wolves and 2 ravens or whatever, I think the answer is never, as long as we keep mythology alive and don't let it stagnate into like, well, I guess he had 2 ravens because that's just what we're allowed, no one's allowed to say otherwise. So I guess like what I'm trying to get at is what I'm trying to do with my show, and what you guys are trying to do with your podcast, and what we're all trying to do together is not let this shit die and just talk about history as if it's this sort of cold, dead old man sat in a chair. It's like, and that was how it was. And then we all have to regurgitate that shit forever. We take those stories, we make them our own, and we retell them. And we retell them on podcasts, and we retell them in books, and we retell them on the stage until, you know, in 200 years, people will be like, man, I never realized that Freyr and Balder were twins. And people will be like, well, they weren't in the original back then. And then Snorri and blah, but it was only the great academic Gamester who suggested that they were actually related in his Mythos Ragnarok. You know, and one day people will talk about me or you guys as being like an authority on this shit. And if they actually talk to us where we're alive, we'd be like, nah, man, I'm just riffing on what I care about within these myths and the things that inspire me. Snorri would have hated me, and so would the dudes before that, and the people in the future will too, because we're feather rufflers. So man, like that's how I think of it, is never does anyone get to tell me what gender Odin was. Even like, if you want to go right to the fucking end of it, I'm not even going to accept that he was a man. I'm going to portray him as a woman, because I don't think it matters, because I don't think gender matters in that way. I think that's just how I am, because this is the generation I'm living in. In the future, they'll look at me and think I'm some crusty old man. They even think there was such a thing as gender in the first place. And that's cool. That's the whole fucking point of mythology and storytelling. And so I think that what we're doing well here, and what the people listening doing well here, is we're keeping it alive for us. Not for the old people back then who and all the people on Instagram and people on Facebook who've decided that's how mythology was. Now we make mythology, and we're doing it now. And we're doing it live.
Exactly. No, that's such a great point. Like, this is exactly what was happening back then. Every generation was making mythology in the moment as they were telling these stories, right? In some contexts, they would maintain ancient ideas and in other contexts they would change these ancient ideas. And essentially, that's also what Snorri Sturluson is doing. He's fitting this stuff into his context as somebody who is Christian, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So it makes perfect sense. And now, if you're not Christian, you can take it and then you can unravel it from his Christian context. You don't have to be fixated on a one-eyed Odin or anything like that. It doesn't.
Exactly. I mean, exactly like you just said. Snorri himself was adapting it from something else. So if we don't adapt it from his stuff to represent what we're going through, then we've just given up on it. And you can't say you're into mythology if you just give up on it. If you just read it in the past, be like, well, that's sort of what it was, then you're not part of this, man. And fuck off. Leave it to us who want to live and breathe it, because that's what it was in the first place. You can't just then look back at it and be like, well, I guess that the mythology is best left to the past. It's just the tippity-tappity people all over again. Just fucking do something. Do something with it. Create it. Live it, man.
Oh yeah.
There we go. That's the show right there. So we've got story time to record after this. Hopefully, Ed,
Nice.
You might have time to jump in.
I'm gonna have to have a pee. But otherwise, I'm there.
You're perfect.
Sweet.
So let people know where they can buy tickets, where it's going to be.
This is the bit of the show I'm really bad at, the promotional side. It's happening very appropriately at a venue called the Cockpit in London on the 4th of December. Tickets are super limited because we've taken out half the seats so that people can social distance if they want to. The best place to find tickets is just go to my Instagram and click on the link in my bio, and you can snatch them up there. They're super cheap because I am making a terrible loss on this show. Literally, if it sells out, I will lose at least £1,000.
Have you got some merch set up, ready to go?
Yeah. So my delightful girlfriend Melanie is making merchandise for us. She's hand screen printing everything. She's not screen printing anything. That's a lie. She is vinyl pressing them. You can even see the press in the background here. See that massive thing? It's a press. She's going to hand press all the merchandise. And so it's all going to be one-off and limited edition because, again, I hate money. So, yeah, come along. It's going to be great. We'll drink a beer.
And your Instagram is just at
my
Ed Gamester.
name, Ed Gamester. Although it's going to be changing to Thus the Guild very soon, but apparently that takes 2 weeks. So it's Ed Gamester for the next while. Yeah.
Matthias, where can people find you?
You can still find me on Instagram.
There we go. Thanks.
Of course, you should also follow the Nordic Mythology Podcast on Instagram. You should follow our Facebook group as well. I'm not on there because has Facebook changed to this meta thing or what?
No, it's just
no idea.
It's just the overall.
I see. Yeah. But so you can find our Facebook group. How many members are in the Facebook group now?
Loads.
1,400.
1,400, and
Jesus.
I'm not even there. Yeah, that's awesome.
Just me.
No,
if you want to, obviously, if you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating, a positive review. It really helps people find the show. And like we said, we're going to be recording the Storytime episode after this, which is a bonus Patreon episode that we do every other week. So you just pause on Patreon, you get the episode either in video or audio format. Jonas Lorentzen is now the narrator for the episodes, where he reads the saga. Me, Matthias, and Ed for this episode, we're going to sit back and just discuss what happens. It usually ends up in hilarity. It really is a good time, a good show. It's definitely worth the chance. Just, if you want to try it out, pause on Patreon for 1 month. You get the back catalogue of all the other episodes that we've done. If you don't like it, cancel your subscription. You're only going to be charged for the 1 month, but it's definitely worth a go. There are some comedy gold. Jonas really does do the work. He does an amazing job narrating. And there we go. Let's wrap it up.
I can't wait. It's going to be my first one. Thanks for having me on for the 4th time.
You're welcome anytime.
I desperately have to piss. Excuse me.
Go.
Excuse me. I'll be back in 10 seconds.